This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our new sponsor, Impact Tactical. They're a tactical outfitter for first responders and military. Me, guys, personally, I can vouch for them and their quality service. I've used them for the last 11 years of my career. Be sure to check them out at impacttactical.com. That's MPAK tactical.com, and be sure to tell them that Two Cops One Donut sent you. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by HRH Combat Arms. They can turn your vision into reality. They specialize in gunsmithing and Cerakoting. Your Cerakote specialist is Air Force veteran and retired police sergeant Paul Ware, aka the Sarge. He can Cerakote your firearms, auto parts, tools, even your sports equipment. This veteran-owned business is located at 5025 Saunders Suite 103, Fort Worth, Texas 76119. You can call them at 682-304-0363, and you can find them online at www.hrhcombatarms.com. That's www.hrhcombatarms.com. All right, welcome back to Cops One Donut. I am your host, Eric Levine, and I am back from vacation. I got my special guest here, Michelle Morgan. She's formerly a victim's assistant advocate. She's now with One Safe Place. Before we get into that, hello, Michelle. How are you?
Great. How are you doing, Eric?
Wonderful. People are mad at me right now, listeners. I went to Barbados, and I tried like hell to get enough episodes to cover while I was gone, and I couldn't do it. As a matter of fact, if you were listening to this and you were like, well, you released an audio podcast with Steve Oliver, but you did not release a video one. That was because we recorded in studio and I could not get the video finished before I left. I tried, it didn't work. And so I apologize for that. So I will get the video. That will be released sometime this weekend as soon as I can get it finished editing and get it uploaded. I'm going to release Michelle's episode as well as soon as I get that edited. So we'll probably have 2 episodes released this weekend. So, Michelle, just so you know, yours will pop out way quicker than most.
That just sounds like an excuse. Like, it sounds like Barbados was more of a priority than getting the podcast done. That's what I hear.
It really was. I won't lie. I mean, I tried. And if anybody wants to give Zenteno some shit, I tried to get him. He is a guy I was trying to get on here to do like an emergency podcast just to get it through. And he said he could, and he didn't. He failed me like 3 days in a row. He was like, oh, I can't. My wife's this. Oh, I can't. My kid's that. Work this. Kid's that. Whatever, dude. I see where your priorities are. Family.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah. So I went to Barbados. Had a great time. 7 days. I don't think I'll go back. My family and I, we really like the Caribbean. First time I ever brought the kids, but
well, that's why you didn't like it.
No, it wasn't that. I do like I know, right? I like hanging with the kids and all that. It just the resort and everything. I didn't care for it. So it's not that I didn't have fun. It was relaxing. It wasn't Antigua, which is my favorite spot. So I'm holding. I've got this comparison way up here with this one place that we went before, and nothing's compared to that. So. Yeah, had a good time. I'm rubbing it in everybody's face right now that's listening. So,
well, and that really is falling short of my vacation next week, which is going to be going to Destin, Florida. So, but
yeah,
one of my oldest childhood friends is getting married, and so I had to say yes. So there you go.
What's the deal with Texans in Destin, Florida?
I don't know. I think it's going to be way too touristy for me. I'm much more of like an all-inclusive where the booze is all included kind of gal. So right. I think it's going to be too much traffic, but at least I'm able to like be there for my friend. And then my youngest just graduated from high school. So check, here's like a quick little trip for you. Congratulations.
Right.
Before then we're empty nesters and get him to college. So there you go.
Nice. Yeah, I've been to Destin now. I had never heard of Destin until I moved to Texas, 11 12 years ago. And I'm like, why do every Texan knows, all of them all know about Destin, Florida. And I'm like, I've never heard of Destin. So now that I've been there, I see what all the fuss is about. It's real pretty. White sand, looks very tropical. But like you said, it's super populated. It's very touristy. So we tend to go towards more Flagler. Flagler, Texas is not as beautiful, but much more secluded. And it's, the local shops and restaurants and whatnot are all small owned businesses. So I like that. I like that vibe if I'm going to stay stateside. But enough about all of me and what I was doing and the excuses I'm making. I'm sorry, everybody. But let's get back. So this podcast, everybody knows, bridging gaps and trying to bring the community closer. I have a lot of cops because it's easy for me to get just with the nature of my job. I've had some firefighters, had some prosecutors, I've had some other people on the other side of the law. We had some fitness and wellness people on here. So, Michelle, you're going to be the first of a kind, I guess I should say, for victim advocacy and domestic violence. And because you're not law enforcement, you play the side of the victim. So the victim themselves could be a criminal element. They could be, they could be innocent. They could both sides of the fence. It doesn't matter because we know how domestic violence can go, and it could be deadly. So, one, kudos to you. We need people like you out there. And then, before we get into all that, where are you from, and what led you to this path?
That's a great question. So from Grapevine, Texas, go Mustangs. So was raised in the Metroplex, did not have a life plan. I actually got a college softball scholarship, a full ride to Texas Wesleyan University. Would have much rather gone somewhere else, but back then, the only place that was given a full ride was Wesleyan. So I was like, well, I guess I'll do that because no one previous to me in my family went to college. So went to college, played softball, and probably about my sophomore year was in a sociology class, which was like one of those Tuesday, Thursday classes that are like an hour and a half and really boring. And in that sociology class, I was, I could pay attention. I was getting straight A's and didn't have to study. And so I was like, where's that degree plan? And so that basically got me to a degree in criminal justice with sociology. And by my senior year, they were like, hey, like, you're going to have to do an internship. And I was like, well, where do I do that at? And so the advisor at the time, who was much more touchy-feely than I am, was like, well, I know someone. And so ended up reaching out at the time to our domestic violence shelter in Fort Worth. Back then, we had two separate ones. There was one in Fort Worth and one in Arlington. And so they reached out to the one in Fort Worth, and they were like, yeah, like, we've already done our volunteer training for the year, because apparently that only happens one time, and you're a procrastinator and we don't have time for you. And I was like, wow, that's helpful. So then they said, well, we've got a friend at Fort Worth Police Department over the victim assistance unit that at the time, the salary for civilians was like so low that they couldn't get someone that had a 4-year degree with 2 years experience working with victims to even take those jobs. Like, literally. And so they had also never used interns before. And so they were like, well, let's see, because like this woman really needs some help in the police department. And so sure enough, I went through all of the hiring processes that any other civilian employee still today has to go through to be an employee at the police department. Like, I remember being so nervous taking my polygraph exam. I was like, if you can't remember what you might have stolen, you haven't stolen anything. So,
True.
Yeah, right. So, but I passed obviously with flying colors, and then started and did my 6-month internship, still not having like a life plan, by the way. And started doing that. Learned everything not to do. I can say this now because my boss at the time has since passed. Wonderful woman, but she had an art degree. She knew absolutely dick about providing services. And FYI, if you're listening to this, Eric said I could cuss, so
Yes.
there you have it. So she knew nothing about trauma. I remember responding to a bank robbery with her, and she was like, okay, so here's how you know if you've done your job really well. And I was like, all right. I mean, I am, just to age myself, I am 21 years old at the time. And she's like, if you walk away and you've made them cry, you've done a good job.
What?
Yeah. I was like, okay, I get I'm 21, but I'm not an idiot. And I don't think like that's all my job is to make them cry. Like, look, people can cry. I'm not like, emotions are fine. But like for me as an advocate to make them cry, like that's your advice. I was like, oh, that's okay. All right. Noted. Probably not, but noted. So after I did my internship, after 6 months, remember.
Hold on. Yeah, we gotta go back. So this person is training you.
Yeah, my boss, the director at the time.
Okay.
It was great.
And in this person is years of experience.
Yes.
Okay. And
yes,
they're trying to tell you as a person, and we now imagine had you take that as gospel. Imagine you didn't have a little bit of that, pushback in your mind, and you taking that as gospel, and now you're expected to help victims in the future.
Make them cry.
And your goal is to make them cry. And there's no real guidance on how you make them cry. You can re-victimize them. You can make them cry emotionally, like making them feel like they should cry. That's not necessarily victimizing them, but you're trying to tell them like that's the right emotion to have right now. So you should be crying, and then they feel bad if they're not. So, I mean, I'm going through this cycle. I love psychology as well. I almost switched my major. So, I'm glad you brought that up because I was the same way. I almost switched mine though to sleep psychology.
Wow.
Because it was just like you. It was the first class that made me pay attention. Like I loved it. And
sign me up. Where's that shit at?
Yeah. Literally. I was like, this is amazing. So, when we talk about mental health, just the trials and tribulations of getting mental health help from people, this person that you had to deal with as a 21-year-old getting fresh out of college is already steered you down, in my opinion, the wrong path. I'm not a doctor. I can't say I don't do what you do, but
that's what I thought.
It doesn't sound right. So you have a bank robbery, which that's really cool. That's a good first call.
Look, no, the very first, I show up for my internship, 21 years old. I show up. Well, she doesn't know what to do with me. So she literally sends me, at the time, we had one of our staff was assigned to Alliance for Children at the Child Advocacy Center. We don't anymore. That program went away a long time ago, and they have exploded. The nonprofit has really grown since that time. But we had a staff person that was there, and they're like, hey, they're going to go out on this call out. So just go report to her that day. I was like, all right. So I go to Alliance for Children. I meet with our advocate, and we're going to go do a home visit. Only problem is the home visit is in Spanish, and it's with a CPS worker. So I'm not bilingual. I wish I was, but I'm not. So I go to this home visit, and I listen to our victim advocate and the CPS worker have conversations with this Spanish-speaking mom, and I have no idea what the hell is going on. And then they take me to this restaurant in Fort Worth that I was like, back then I was like, mac and cheese and chicken nuggets, please. That was about my culinary experience.
My kids are like that still.
Yeah, right. I mean, I blossomed now, but back then I was not. That was my mother's fault. She was not a good mom, but that's a different topic on a different day. But but literally went into this restaurant and I was like, everyone's speaking Spanish around me. Now I'm going to this weird ass restaurant. Like the boss I'm supposed to work for is like, don't have time for you. I'm gonna butt you over to this girl over here. And I was just like, what the hell is going on? So that was my first day on my internship experience.
Jeez. And what year are we talking?
This was the year 2000.
So this was in 2000. Okay.
Right after
just before 9/11.
Yeah, I was actually still working for the police department when 9/11 occurred. I remember we were still at 350 West Belknap for those Fort Worth officers that might be listening. And I worked on the third floor. We were like, victim assistance was located like in the middle of the criminal investigation division on that floor. And I remember all the investigators were running around. And I remember walking down the hall at the time, the only person on the floor that had a TV was the captain's office. And so I remember going into Captain Reflogel at the time, his office, and literally watching people come out of buildings. And I hired on right after, it was pretty close after the Wedgwood shootings happened. And I probably for 2 or 3 years after Wedgwood happened was still working with families as an aftermath of that shooting as well.
Damn. Okay. Yeah. So you do your internship and you get hired onto a PD, and from what I'm gathering so far, your impression as an intern is these people, these types of programs need help.
Yeah.
Not from you, but internally they need help.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely.
Okay, so
and like it was a job. My dad said, you graduate college, like you need a job, and like I actually believed him. I years later found out he was a pushover the way that he treated my brother, but I thought like, oh, okay, I do need a job. So then when they were like, hey, we're going to waive the experience for you, do you want to take this job with this shitty amount of pay? And I was like, yeah. Why not?
Yeah. Okay, so explain to me, and for those listening, what is the mission? What is the purpose of this position?
So per Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, every law enforcement agency in the state of Texas and every county attorney's agency in the state of Texas shall have and designate for law enforcement, it's a crime victims liaison. For county attorney's office, it's usually identified in the code as like a victim assistance coordinator. So per Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, Chapter 56 to be specific, all crime victims are afforded certain rights. And with those rights that they are afforded, the law enforcement agencies and county attorney's office shall be notifying those said victims what their rights are. And so that was kind of what we did on a day-to-day basis. So all of the police reports that would get entered on violence against persons, we would, through our database system, get all of copies of those reports. We would review those reports per that statute. We then had to mail out certain information to them. And then probably what I did most notably was filing for crime victims compensation through the Attorney General's office. And so there's a lot of myths about that program. People are like, oh my God, I'm a victim. Where's my check at? Well, it doesn't work like that. Helped a lot of officers that were injured in the line of duty. Many of them have off-duty employment jobs, and so help them recoup those expenses to them. Worked, unfortunately, 2 line of duty deaths while I was at the police department. Those were pretty traumatic, as you can imagine. There's a lot of different things that have to happen in those sort of scenarios, and then was on 24-hour callback and responded on scene for anything that patrol or investigative units thought that we might need to be on scene for.
Okay. I did not know that y'all helped police officers that were victims. I didn't know that at all.
Yeah, so like if you're injured, and let's just say that you're probably what I got a lot was someone is charged for resisting arrest, which is crime, right? And so upon them resisting arrest, you're chasing them and you fall in a hole and you break your ankle. So workers' comp is going to cover your full-time employment. But if you work at Risky's Barbecue or this bar across the street or whatever it may be that you do to earn extra income, you don't get that as supplemental income. And many cops and first responders depend on those off-duty employment jobs. And so I would file those applications for those officers to be able to get those off-duty jobs paid to them as lost earnings until they were able to be released back to work.
Wow, I never heard of that before. I didn't know that as a person who likes to work off duties.
There you go. But so so you know,
I try to pick my off duties as the most laid back off duties you can get. I don't work bars or any of that. I work wedding events usually or concerts. But okay, so you're educating me already. I love it. That's my favorite part of this doing this podcast is I learn so much from my guests. Okay, so you get hired fresh at a police department, and you're stepping into the role as you're at the bottom of the barrel. You're a low person on the totem pole. What is your goals? What are you looking to, like, what do you want to achieve? I could tell you, me as a police officer, I wanted to help people. You know, I wanted to do all these things. But as a victim's assistant and all that, like, what are you looking, what's the job satisfaction? What are you looking to get?
Well, it's funny. Like, I'm going to tell you, like, the legit truth. So I got hired on, it was, I needed a paycheck. So like that at that moment was the path. And then very quickly after, I had one of my mentors. She wasn't my supervisor, but she was one of the higher ups in my office. She she had already retired at Child Protective Services from City of Oklahoma for like probably like 20 something years. And so this was like her secondary employment. So her plan was she's going to work for the police department for 5 years. And then she was done and she was going to draw a secondary retirement. And so we were coming up closer, and like she was the one that I really listened to and learned everything to do and not to do. And so, and I just loved her because she just was like, no nonsense, matter of fact. I remember I had this one lady who had come into the office one day, and she had a situation, and no situation where she had reported an offense as of late. She just had a lot of situations. And I remember she literally brought her briefcase in, and she like took all these papers and spread all these papers. And I'm trying to, like, in my little toolbox at the time, still 21 years old, trying to figure out, like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this lady? Like, there's no crime. I can't file crime victims compensation for her. Like, why am I talking to this lady? So I remember going back to Helen Hahn was her name. And I remember going back to Helen, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this lady. She was like, what does she want, Michelle? I was like, I don't know. And so she was like, watch this. And so I swear to God, she comes into the room, and this lady is fixing to start from the beginning of what she just probably asked with me for an hour about. And she's fixing to start all over again. I was like, oh, I don't know that I have it in me. Oh no, not with Helen. Helen picked up all her shit on the counter, packs it all up, and goes, I need you to put this shit away, just like that. And goes, now answer this question for me. What do you need? Well, we don't do that here. So bye. I mean, and it was just, I was like, that's all I have to do? Like, it was magical. So anyhow, so Helen is who I credit Everything that I do well and not. It's her fault. So
Helen.
Yep, Helen. She moved back to Oklahoma. Great human being. So for 2 years, I literally was like, okay, what's next? And I bring Helen up because Helen was getting closer to that benchmark of leaving. And I was like, you can't leave me with her, which was our boss at the time. And I was like, because they were like super friends, they were around the same age. I was like, you can't leave me with her. Like, I'm going to go crazy. And so I knew that once Helen left, that like, I wasn't going to continue to work for my boss at the time. Like, I needed a different plan. So I remember talking to a lot of detectives at the time about like, they were trying to recruit me to be a police officer. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I kind of like to wear my hair past the collar. I'm not like wearing an extra 30 pounds around the waist is not real attractive to me. And then I thought, well, what about this? What about that? I just wasn't like really sure like what the next step was. And then our boss died. Yeah.
Ooh,
Like
okay.
legit, just passed away.
Huh.
We think that she knew that she was sick and just didn't want to tell us. Like one of the creepy things is just a couple of things that she would say here and there. And she had brought our admin, our OA2 position, into her office to help her clean up her desk. And basically what happened is our admin at the time told us that she would just go in there and she was going through her office and just was sitting there. Like, she's like, I'm not helping, I'm not doing anything. And when she passed away, her son had come in town from New York. And so we wanted to go get her personal belongings. All the things that were in that box were all of her personal belongings. And so we think she knew it was coming and just didn't tell anyone.
Oh, okay.
So at that moment, I had a little bit of a different opportunity. And so the different opportunity at that moment was Helen was not interested in taking that position. She had retirement on the brain. And so I was fortunate enough that Rhonda Robertson was my captain at the time. Actually put me in an acting role for almost a year because of my age, just to see if I could do the job or not. And then after almost a year of being in an acting capacity, then they made me the director. And so after being the director, it was how can I elevate the level of advocacy that we provide to victims of crime? My philosophy was always, whether it was a homicide, sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse case, whatever it was that we were dealing with, is like, how, if I experienced that or someone in my family experienced that, how would I want to be treated? And what is all the information that I need to know that I don't know, that most people don't. And so that was kind of my just very direct, seems real simplistic, but it really actually works. If I didn't know something as an advocate, you just tell them, I don't know, but you know what? I'm going to find out.
Yeah.
And so that's just was kind of my approach, because it is sort of a learning game. So that was kind of my whole philosophy. And then after that, things changed. And while I was in that position, we learned about this concept of a family justice center where you bring all these agencies together. And I was like, yeah, like I remember it was 2004 in Arlington, Texas, and this guy from California, Casey Gwen, comes down and starts presenting about all the things that they did in San Diego. And I was like, yeah, like that makes sense. Like, why are we not doing that? The difference is it was a generational gap. Those that had started the Batters Women's movement had to fight and scrape for everything that they had. And so by the time we were in the 2000s, they were in protection mode of don't you dare, don't you touch my cheese. Like, we have fought, we deserve what we have. And so there was turf wars that already were happening. And we did apply for a federal grant back in 2004 while I was at the police department to contract with our national center to build a family justice center. And we actually didn't get it. And so then that was kind of my dream at that point in time. Like, is this something that could ever accomplish here? I was settled with the fact probably 10 years in, I pissed off a couple of my bosses because I'd gotten a little mouthy. Imagine that. And so I decided that I needed a backup plan, and a master's degree probably would do me very well. So after 10 years in, I got a master's degrees of all the things that I decided that I wasn't going to do. And so that left a master's of management with public administration. By that time, I'd been managing people for 8 years and managing programs. So I thought that was the most appropriate. And so went to do that. And then we had a new chief that came on that was very familiar with family justice centers, and he actually went to our Tarrant County Mental Health Connection meeting and was like, where's our family justice center? And everyone was like, huh? What are you talking about? There were actually people in the room that knew about the project and what we had done in 2004, and they did not tell him. And so you know how it is, like you get a new chief and like every smoozer in the planet has already like called the chief's office to have a meeting with them. That's not me. So I had never met the chief. Like, I'm actually like, just leave our tiny civilian unit alone. That's really what we wanted to, like, leave me alone. I don't need you to know that we're here. We do our deal. We're going to make you look good. Don't worry about us. Until then, he went and asking about the Family Justice Center. So I remember one of my staff members going, "Oh my God, I did this thing. The chief asked at this wrong meeting, and like I raised my hand and told him, and that like he needed to talk to you." And I was like, "It's fine, like not it's not a problem." So I called the chief's office, and then I remember walking into his office, and I was like, "Hello, sir. I'm Michelle Morgan, and I worked for you. And you mentioned this at a meeting, and let me tell you everything that we've done and what we need to do." And he very patiently listened to me, and he was like, "That's wonderful. But we're going to build a family justice center, and that's what I want to do." And I was like, "Well, that's great. However, like, you don't even have a centralized domestic violence unit." And he was like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, like we used to back in the day, and then because we did some stupid Justex survey that says that domestic violence is a neighborhood issue. I don't know, like they don't like get in the car and go to Walmart, you know, in the next jurisdiction."
Yeah.
The survey said it was a neighborhood issue, so they then decentralized it. That's a whole nother subject on a different day, where I was pulled in the office of a deputy chief who told me that just FYI, you support the decentralization of a domestic violence unit. And I was like, "Oh, okay." So when someone from city council came knocking on my door to meet with me, and they wanted to know about my opinions for decentralizing the domestic violence unit, I said, "Well, I've been told to tell you that I support the decentralization of domestic violence."
Oh my God.
And they were like, "We completely understand you. I hope that you do." So anyhow, that chief re-centralized the domestic violence unit. That was the first thing that he did, and then really did leverage the private sector to be able to bring in some private dollars for us to get the project going. And after he got a couple of commanders out of the way that stopped blocking our grants and thinking equipment was more of a priority than contracting to do the planning of the center, once we finally got that federal grant, then we were able to start the planning process. I never imagined at that point in time that I would leave the police department and go work for the nonprofit. My agenda at the time is that the Family Justice Center would actually be underneath the umbrella of the police department. And what I was looking at the time is I just needed to elevate the level of service that sometimes we were doing and sometimes we weren't. There was
So you mean just making them cry wasn't
no.
the service that you continued? No. That you didn't continue that agenda?
No.
Okay.
If they cry, they cry. If they don't, they don't. That's fine with me.
So before you go farther, I got some questions. So I was, maybe it's my ignorance. The victim advocacy, that funding is typically under the umbrella of a police department.
Correct.
I didn't know that. I thought the whole time, I always thought they were their own separate. I just thought you guys were a side cart of the police department, meaning you're your own thing. Nobody could, an officer can't tell you shit because you guys are your own thing, but we have no choice but to work together because of the law. That's how it is. But that's not true.
No, they are at least here in the Metroplex, for those police agencies that have crime victims liaisons or victim assistance personnel, they are funded through the police department. Most of the time, they are underneath City of Fort Worth. They are underneath the command of the Criminal Investigation Division.
Okay, so let's discuss this a little bit further, because me, as a dummy who doesn't do this, I'm not a domestic violence expert. I didn't work as a domestic violence detective. I just remember my patrol time and having to do my packets and stuff like that.
You're welcome for that packet.
Thank you very much. we'll talk about the packets in a second too, because I want people to know about them. But I would think in this, you tell me if I'm wrong, I would want you guys to be separately funded and operated.
Why?
Because I don't think it's a checks and balances system. I don't think the cops, and this is just, like I said, I am not, you and I have never talked until today. So, I just me. I don't know. I could be wrong, but I would think that it would be more appropriate for a victims assistance program to be completely independent. So there's no corruption of police, or because you could be dealing with a suspect as well as a victim. And I'm just, this is me brainstorming here. So you tell me, what's your thoughts?
Look, I can't piss off every victim advocate across the umbrella. But I will say I now, on the nonprofit side, I have perspectives of both. My younger version was like, I mean, we kick ass. Like, of course, like we need to be employees of the PD. We have access to all the same records that you do as a police officer. We have all access to all supplemental things that investigators are putting in there, criminal records, emergency protective orders. Like, we have all the access. And so that with that comes a certain level of authority. I think the issue that you have, and what I saw and probably was guilty of in my times at the police department, is when you are a civilian employee and you work alongside a police and militant culture, you want to fit in with that culture. And just naturally, in and of itself, victim advocacy and military style are on completely different opposite ends of the spectrum. And so the problem is I should be challenging you all to do better, or to do other things that you might not like to hear. But when I am employed by you, it makes it difficult to do that.
There's an unconscious bias.
100%.
Yeah. That's I mean, that, like I said, you and I, we haven't talked about this. I really have zero play in the game when it comes to victim I don't have anything to do with it. Right. I very rarely run across domestic violence stuff. If I do, it's because I'm helping out another officer or something like that. That's really not my forte. And hats off to all my people that do that type of thing. And detectives and whatnot. It's definitely needed. It's just, it doesn't, it's not me. So, when I am hearing what you're telling me, it doesn't, that was the first thing that was going off the alarm in my head. I'm like, why the hell is she being employed? Like, I understood you being a part of the PD because we need to work together, but you should be your own separate thing. I don't understand why you're reporting to a captain, and that doesn't make any sense to me.
Which was also, like, in my years, was a fight to keep, because like people would call, I remember people calling my old boss was like, I'm a lieutenant. And I was like, no, bitch, you're not. Like, you did not go to police academy. You do not have a gun. Like, you're not a lieutenant. And she was like, well, but like, I'm an equivalent of a lieutenant. And there were a couple of like deputy chiefs and captains that like gave her that authority. I very quickly would diminish that. Do not call me a lieutenant. I did not earn what you have, which I think gave me a little bit more credibility, because I was like, I'm a civilian. Yeah, I was very clear about that. I work for the police department, but I am not a police officer. Yeah. And I think that needed to be clear to the officers, and it also needed to be clear to the community. The other problem that you have is that the other issue is when let's just say I'm a licensed counselor or I'm a licensed social worker, which I am none of the above. But I did hire many of those individuals that have those certifications. Many of them think that, well, I'm a social worker, so if I'm engaging with this victim in the office or in the field, whatever it may be, well, I have confidentiality. No, you don't, because you are employed by said law enforcement agency, and anything that victim tells you is not privileged information. And so if you document any of that in the district attorney's office or the opposing defendant's attorney wants any of those records, they can request all of those records, and then they go into that criminal investigation.
What
and
the
so
fuck?
Right. But back in the day, like when I started, no one knew that. Now
Yeah.
people do. And then like I've had some victim advocates try to go, no, like there's an exemption. I said, tell me in the law where there is an exemption. There's not an exemption. There's not one. Like that's BS. And once the prosecutors find out that all that information they can get their hands on it, they ask for it. So it also is like if you were employed from a police agency and you're a victim advocate, you need to be careful about the information that you collect from that victim.
Yeah.
And what you're documenting, because it could actually harm them. Like someone tells me that they're suicidal, depending upon what that is. Now the defense gets their hand on that and it's like, this bitch is crazy. Like, when it has nothing to do with the offense that actually happened to them.
Yeah. Holy shit. Yeah, that's and how can you truly, how can you gain your whole thing is victims trusting you. Mm-hmm. How the hell are they going to trust you if everything you turn around and say is going to be subject to discovery?
Right.
I don't like that.
No.
Is it still like that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally.
It's still that way.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh God. I hope you tell these people this stuff up front.
Well, I mean, so like the difference now, right? Like running the nonprofit is, so when someone comes on site and they want services, Fort Worth Police Department Victim Assistance is in our building. They're a wonderful partner of ours. And so if someone comes in and they want to engage in the criminal justice system, that victim at that point, we go over two things. One, do you have a warrant for your arrest? Right? Like,
yeah.
Even though they're a civilian employee, once again, they have access to all the things. If not, they have access to investigators that are going to do all the things. So the last thing I want is someone to come to one safe place and get taken out in handcuffs because they have a felony warrant for their arrest. Uh-huh. So first question. Second question is explaining to them how informed consent works, privilege versus non-privilege. Everything that you told me, because I'm an employee of a nonprofit organization, DV agency, remains confidential. But once I bring in the victim advocate from the PD or a police officer, anything that you tell that person is subject to that criminal investigation. Do you understand this? Is there anything that you have told me that you do not want to tell them? And then we actually have a separate consent form that our victims will sign, geared specifically towards law enforcement. So we have covered our bases on those two things before we bring a law enforcement partner into the room.
Okay, so before we get too far down that rabbit hole, you work now for a nonprofit. Let's say either the victim advocacy program for a police department or what you do. Help me walk, a person that has no clue about any of this stuff. They all of a sudden find themselves or a family member is victim of domestic violence. What is the process from there involving you?
Come on in. So for us at the Family Justice Center, we have 25 agencies that provide services on site. We are one of the world's largest family justice centers across the country. When we opened our permanent facility that we're in, which was in October of 2014, we were the largest.
And this is One Safe Place?
This is One Safe Place. Yep.
Okay.
So someone can walk in without an appointment. Anyone currently that is experiencing intimate partner violence, domestic violence, familial violence, all the family violences. And now in 2020, we actually expanded our framework to include human trafficking because we have two nonprofit partners that do human trafficking work on site. So traditionally, Monday through Friday, anyone can walk in from 8:30 to around 5 p.m. without an appointment, and they can talk to an advocate. And so one of the things, are you going to pull up the website here?
Yep.
Yeah, so one of the things that'll happen is we'll kind of walk through, tell us what's going on. This is our lobby space that you see there. We're going to figure out what sort of systems have they touched, have they interacted with, what type of violence has occurred, is it only emotional and verbal abuse? I would much rather see before physical violence has entered into the relationship. If it is intimate partner violence, we're going to do what we call a danger assessment that is included in that packet that patrol is utilizing. Problem is, patrol officers just don't know how to score it, nor do they have the capability to score it when they're in the field.
Hold on. Let's talk about that.
Okay.
Let's discuss that. So
okay.
The process goes, you're victim, police come out, they're taking the report, they've already made up their mind, like, yes, this is a domestic violence issue, family violence issue, something to that effect. And I think it's nationwide, could be wrong, but at least in the state of Texas, there's procedures that you have to go through for a victim, and letting them know of all the resources that are available, all the ins and outs of where they can go, the emergency protective orders, what that is, the difference between an emergency protective order versus a restraining order. Which emergency protective order, if you're offered an emergency protective order, I suggest you take that. That's my personal advice. Always take that if you think that further violence is possible from the suspect. But so there's this rather large packet that you're in the worst time of your life, that an officer is going to ask you to go through, and he's going to ask you the same questions you've already answered over and over and over again. And I want you to know, from an officer's perspective, I understand how frustrating that can be, but sitting down and answering the questions to the packet are worth its weight in gold for you in the long run. And anybody listening to this, it just depends on where you're at in your struggle, your life. You may hear me now and say, like, it's full of shit. It doesn't do shit. It doesn't do anything. Okay, I get it. But talk to people that have listened to people like Michelle and allowed people like me to help. And you go through these packets, and I ain't filled one of these packets out in years, so I'm a little rusty. But I can tell you that you will go through these packets and you will answer some very intimate questions that you may not want to answer, or that you've already answered and you don't want to say it again, but it's worth it. But I will let Michelle talk more about that. So we fill these packets out, Michelle, and you get a hold of these, correct?
No, not anymore, because I'm on the nonprofit side.
Okay.
But your victim advocates and the law enforcement agencies should be getting them.
Yes. So we'll fill out these packets, and the part of that packet will be the emergency protective order, which it basically means the person that victimized you cannot go to your work. You can't go within like 5. It just depends on what the officer puts down. I would always put like 3,000 yards or some crazy number that just they could not go around your, and I never got any kickback for it. So if you're an officer out there listening, like, you don't have to put the standard, 500 yards or 500 feet or whatever, put whatever number you want, get crazy. It just depends on the vibe you get on that call. But I would put a ridiculous number, and then they can't go by your home. They can't go by the mother's home. And officers, this is on you. Think of all the places that this asshole is going to show up. It's not just where they work and where they live.
Childcare centers,
yeah.
Schools,
yeah.
All the places.
Their work, the grocery store they use. I would come up with all. It just depends, like, how I felt the risk for further violence was going to be. So, anyway, that's what this packet does. And this packet goes through, and then I guess that goes to the victim advocacy. And Michelle, you take over from here, because I'm going to get myself in trouble.
Well, I mean, really, the packet was designed like back in the day, there was no packet at all. I mean, like, it was like, I'm going to do a traditional burglary vehicle report the same as I'm going to do a domestic violence case. The reason the packet was created is because there's so many different moving parts to hold offenders accountable for domestic violence, and there's so many different complexities of trauma that potentially, you as patrol are rolling up on. And so the idea was we didn't want anyone to miss anything. And then we also, because usually this is in domestic violence, it's not like a one and done type situation. There has been sort of a history. So we needed to know what some of those other risk factors might be in that situation. And so really, it's a tool design that goes to an investigator. So your family violence unit. So someone who's assigned to family violence is going to get that packet. They're going to review it for corrections. Is there anything that maybe they're missing? And then they're going to file that packet to the district attorney's office. And the district attorney's office is hopefully utilizing that for higher bails and bonds. The magistrate should be looking at that packet before signing the EPO, like all of those sort of things. So you have now all of the collection of the information before we're putting some of these offenders that are really high risk on the streets that then literally are going to murder their victims, because that's what unfortunately some of them will do.
Yeah,
and we've seen that here.
I've seen it. I mean, I didn't see the murder happen, but I've seen people that we've, either unfortunately didn't arrest at the time. We allowed them to walk it off, and they come back. Domestic violence is you hear it a lot. If you listen to anything law enforcement wise, it's like everybody says it's the most dangerous call. It really is, because it's so unpredictable and it's so volatile and so just, it's bad. It's hard to explain. And we've had, in my 17 years, several homicides from it, and you do your best to try to prevent anything from like that happening. And you want to give, in the time frame with police work now, everything's about community policing. And when you let somebody go, you try to let them walk. They try to let them walk it off because they think that they didn't see any evidence of violence. They think that they're doing some sort of, community policing aspect, and they're letting that person walk away. And that was their game plan from the get-go. Oh, she called the cops. And I'm genderizing here, but yeah, she called the cops. Okay, so I'm gonna go walk it off while I go get a weapon, and then when the cops are gone, the coast is clear, I'm gonna come back, and I'm gonna show her what it's like to betray me. So
I think for me, like when I worked in the police department, like people are like, wow, like how did you like do this, like get into this work, right? And like how are you like leading one of the most comprehensive family justice centers across the country? And when I was in the police department, I was doing a lot of training for I remember being literally thrown to the wolves and doing a 40-hour training. Like, who, number one, y'all don't like to go to 40-hour training, like you hated it, and then secondly, you sure as hell don't want to listen to the touchy-feely stuff. So for 2 years, I had the same subject matter for 1 hour, and then they put me right before lunch. And with all the touchy-feely stuff, I was like, well, this is fabulous.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's either like sink or swim, sort of situation.
I have a feeling you did just fine.
But like had to,
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not the person that's going to cry over in the corner, but I can imagine that being a really intimidating situation for other people. And literally how I handled that is I'd walk across the room. I remember closing the door and I was like, well, this can go one or two things. We can stay here the entire time, or you all can stop talking and I'll let you go early for lunch. And they were like, hell yeah, let's go. And so that was kind of catch the attention, establish my credibility, and always let them go to lunch early. And got through the touchy-feely subject matter that they really didn't care about, but tried to give them something that they learned about. I don't know where I was going with all of that other than
we were talking about the packets and cops taking it more serious, letting somebody walk on the community policing aspect. You think you're helping out.
Well, and that was one of the things for me that then after doing those trainings and doing the police academy, after they'd get back on the street, I'd talk to some officers. I'd be like, what do you feel like you need more of? Like you had me in the academy, you've had me in 40-hour, like, what do you feel like? And it was 100%, no matter what officer I ever asked, it was always domestic violence. We're sick and tired of going to these calls. we go out there, we tell them like, okay, I'm just going to tell y'all, this is my pet peeves. Don't say this. Like, if we come back out here, I remember rolling up actually and watching a cop go, if we come back here, one of the two of you is going to jail. And I was like, ah,
I've said it.
I get it.
I've said it.
I know, like, I get it. I understand the frustration. Or, lady, if you don't help yourself, then I'm going to have CPS come take your kids. And it's like, you don't have to say that. That's already a real fear of theirs. And like, you as a person of authority, like saying that, like,
Yeah.
it's those sorts of things like I've heard. And so it was like, for me, I say this not to be insensitive, but as an advocate, like when I responded to a homicide and when, from an advocacy perspective, I worked the homicide, nothing changed. I mean, the circumstances around how the person was murdered, the family dynamics may be different, but like the stages of grief and all the things from a victim advocacy perspective were always the same, no matter what homicide it was that I worked. Domestic violence was not the same. Everyone had different barriers. Everyone had different complexities, language barriers, immigration, trying to get divorced, protective orders. It was just a really complicated and challenging sort of situation. And if we are throwing strategies at domestic violence, like we're doing for burglary of motor vehicles, you're never going to prevent violence from happening, and you're not utilizing the effective strategies for that. And so for me, it was like, well, that's complicated. That's challenging. I could see the cops that I was surrounded with were really struggling of what can I do? And then the pressure as a family violence investigator, like, oh my God, if this person ends up dead, then I'm going to be scrutinized like I didn't do my job. And that's just a lot of pressure, you know, for someone to take on. And so I understand why still today, I just corrected someone not too terribly long ago in a meeting, and they were like, well, I mean, that's family violence. You can't do anything about that. And I was like, but you can, just not all like you do your other crime prevention strategies. It's a different approach, and it's hard, it's complicated, and it's challenging. And so for me, I like a challenge. And I think that's kind of why I directed myself in that path. Was I just felt like our system inadvertently had created all of these barriers, and then our system blames our victims for staying in that relationship when we're the ones that created the challenges to begin with. Not intentionally, obviously. And our criminal justice system, I mean, is not the end all be all. Sometimes it's 10 times worse for them. I can't tell you how many victims I've walked through the criminal justice system, and when they don't report, like, I get it. I literally told the sexual assault victim, you probably should just not report that. I mean, it's so hard. It makes it 10 times harder for them and puts them at greater risk when they do engage all the way through the criminal justice system.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the more tricky types of things to deal with, especially cops. We're not psychology experts. Some of us have psychology degrees. I know that's a more popular degree amongst police officers. I don't have it. But even then, it doesn't make you an expert by any means.
Living with that real fear and that trauma. I mean, unless you've been in those shoes, it's hard. And all of the dynamics in each relationship can be similar, but many of them have varying degrees as well.
Yeah. I keep hearing an echo. It's driving me insane. Do you hear it at all? Okay, it's just me. That's fine then. I just turned down my gain a little bit to see if it fixed it. It seems to make it better. So, all right, so I'm trying to, because this is going to be a long podcast. I can already see it happening. Because you've got me, my mind just going nuts, and this is a problem with it's not your fault, it's my fault. My brain won't shut the fuck up. So,
okay.
I'm going to try to solve all the domestic violence problems in this one podcast.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, good. You and me both.
So, all right, let's start with the officer side. Okay.
Okay.
I will tell you what I've seen Let's just do it this way. I will tell you what I have sucked at when it comes to domestic violence stuff. You go to that repeat offender call, the one that just keeps calling, and it's all bullshit stuff for the most part. It's not violence. It's the argument. You know, he took the keys to the car. He won't let me leave. I want to go. And you've been out there 3 or 4 times, and you're just like, what do you want me to do? And then a lot of times we're stuck. As an officer, I can't arrest anybody. There's nothing I can do about it. And I come out, and the problem that you have is you're constantly dealing with nothing that I can do. So I'm like, you need to leave. And they don't leave. And then I offer them the opportunity. Hey, do you want me to give you a ride somewhere? There's nowhere for me to go. And you get this cyclic stuff. And then the next domestic that I happen to handle that has nothing to do with that call, all that same stuff's running through my head. And then I just took it over to the next call. And it's not their fault.
That's a great perspective.
And I've done it. I know I've done it. And it took somebody calling me out on it. Like, hey, dude, like, show a little, like, you're being a dick. Like, not like an inverted dick, but I was being a dick. And I'm like, oh, you're right. I'm letting this call affect this call. And that's not just domestic violence. That's a lot of calls, but I see that a lot. Right. So how do we help those? What are your suggestions on the calls that I can't do anything on?
Send the civilian response unit to it.
Yeah, well, that wasn't a thing back when I was doing these calls, so.
No, and actually, I don't think that's part of their, like, code that they can, respond to, because they all come in as a domestic disturbance, right? So, like, you're not sure until you get there, like, what varying level of domestic disturbance calls do you have? That might be someone you just need to refer to marital counseling, or the local church or something like that. But what I will say is, in that packet, right, because that is a common problem of, well, how do I know if, like, this bitch is going to get killed tomorrow versus, like, this is just 2 people arguing over a set of keys, right, that are in a toxic relationship, and now they brought us into the middle of it.
I didn't even think about that. That's one of the things the packet's supposed to help an officer figure out. Yeah, yes. You're right. I didn't think about that. Like I said, I'm out of practice. I haven't used one in so long.
Well, but the thing is like, I don't know what the training protocol is now, because I've been out for 10 years, but I know when I was there, like back in the day, we weren't training on the different elements of the packet. I remember an investigator got really mad at me because, like, I remember watching him sit up, literally he crossed his legs, sat up at the top of the stage in a new academy recruit class, and just like in a very monotone way just like went through the packet and was like, and this is what you do, and he said something about like any idiot with a crayon can fill this out, and I was like like, no wonder we're getting shitty packets completed. Like, but it was like, you're a family violence detective. You may not have any training experience whatsoever. Just go tell those recruits what they need to do. And I was like, that's their first introduction to family violence. So I think he got mad at me because I did get him kicked out of the training academy. I was like, someone else needs to do this content. It doesn't have to be us, but like someone else needs to do the content, because like, that's going to be one of the majority of the calls that they go on when they're in patrol. And just any idiot with a crayon is like not appropriate.
No, I agree with you.
I can't believe that still sticks with me, but on the packet, there is, I don't even know what it says anymore, but there are 20 questions, and that's an evidence-based danger assessment. And that tells us how at risk someone is for homicide. The problem is in the field, like some of those questions have higher weight than some of the others. So like, I'll give you an example. Like the last question on the danger assessment is, has the victim tried to commit suicide? That is a 0-point question. It has no bearing on the weight totals at all. What you don't have in the packet is the access to what we do, which is our computer system. We enter all the yeses and nos, it populates a score, and then we're like 8 or less is like pretty low danger. 18 or more is extreme danger, and all the red flags for a homicide to occur are present. Well, an officer in the field doesn't have access to do that. And so, yeah, you don't have access. All you're doing is checking the yes or no's. It doesn't mean like, oh, there's a lot of yeses on here. I mean, you could do some probabilities, like the more yeses that you check, there's a higher probability that person is at risk for homicide. Yeah. So things you should be looking at is access to guns. If they got guns in the home, they're 500% more likely to be killed by a firearm. And in Texas, we got a lot of firearms. That's not a discussion on a right to bear arms. My husband's retired PD, so I got a lot of guns in my house, probably in places I don't even know where they're at.
Toilet guns.
But if there's if they're a domestic violence offender and there are guns in the house, that's a problem. Yes. And so that does increase their chances of being killed by that firearm by 500%. So if there's guns in the home,
that's a significant number.
It is a significant number. Yeah. If there is a sexual assault is occurring, if they are forcing them to have sex when they don't want to, drugs and alcohol, not because drugs and alcohol, cause violence, because, when I get drunk, I just get louder. So some people can be angry drunks. They probably should not drink whatever makes them angry. But those are typically not causes. People can have mental health issues and not be abusers and not have power and control dynamics. So when a victim is pregnant, and there's physical violence that enters in when that female is pregnant, that is a high risk for homicide, which kind of stumps people a little bit. And the reason for that is, you think about it, when a woman is pregnant, like that's the time that society says you should protect this individual. So the person that is responsible for her pregnancy, if they are physically putting their hands on them, that is a high risk indicator for a homicide. And usually what happens when you have that power and control imbalance and someone is pregnant, who's the one that gets all the attention in the relationship when they're pregnant? It's like every granny in Walmart and Target want to put your hands on your belly that you don't even know. Well, if you're in a power and control dynamic, that is not okay with an abuser, because they're the ones that get all the attention. And so that's where you'll see that imbalance of that power and control in those relationships. And then the number one thing that you should be looking for something that is high risk is whether or not that victim has been strangled. If they've been choked, if their breath has been impeded in any way, that is what we call the last warning shot. So once that last warning shot happens, basically that means when you look at the continuum of violence, most of these relationships starts with an argument, then maybe they escalate to a push, then maybe we got a punch, then we got a kick, and then you escalate all the way to strangulation to homicide. Once you've choked someone out, there is no place other to go than homicide. And so the statistics for strangulation are, if it's been one time, they are 750% more likely to be killed by that abuser. If during that one time they passed out to unconsciousness, their risk factor goes up to 1,000% more likely. Or if choking has happened more than one time, then they're also in that 1,000% more likely to be killed. And then the final cause of death will probably not be strangulation. Statistically, it will be with the firearm.
So let's throw out the problem I see with law enforcement. And this is, I like being transparent because I think it helps give more credibility to what I'm trying to do here. I remember when strangulation was added to the packet, and I remember officer responses. It wasn't a good one. It was like, Jesus Christ, this is one more thing I got to fucking fill out.
Yep.
One more thing.
Yep.
But I can tell you, that has never been told to me, what you just told me.
I know.
I've never heard that before.
So I travel across the country, and in any spill I give across the country, and I'll tell you, like when I started 22 years ago, I was like, oh, okay, you get choked out. I don't know. Like, don't you know that? I mean, like you'll know, like you'll have visible injuries. I have, in my journey of developing the Family Justice Center and meeting with national experts across the country, I have learned so much more. And so I try to do my best to bring it here, travel across the country, talking about strangulation and what its effects are. Let me tell you some other things to cops. because this is the shit that'll really piss you off. So the research also supports that when you look at who is killing our cops, look at those offenders' histories, because I'm going to tell you that in their histories, about 66% is about the national average right now, where they have a history of domestic violence, usually with strangulation, and they are the ones that are then killing our police officers.
Ambushing.
100%.
Yeah.
You know, like you're responding to a robbery. Well, matter of fact, Officer Garrett Hull from Fort Worth over in my area was responding to some bars that had been recently robbed over here. And there were 3 suspects that shot and killed him. And 2 of those had past domestic violence histories. The other thing people aren't talking about is, let's look at the mass murders that are happening across the country. I have a whole PowerPoint slideshow of how many of those mass murderers all had domestic violence backgrounds. If our criminal justice system would hold the offenders accountable for domestic violence, most notably strangulation, which is a felony in almost all states now across the country, then they wouldn't have done those mass shootings or killed our officers. And so, you know, the other thing is, like, right when I started this work, it's like, okay, well, people blame the victim. Society blames the victim. Like, if that bitch is going to stay in that relationship, then she deserves what she gets. I literally have heard my husband say that, and I'm like, you're smarter than that. We're just not going to have this conversation. He was like, okay, that's probably best. And so that's that, but that's it. It's like, I mean, if someone hit you, Michelle, like, would you stay? And I'm like, it's not that easy. Like, it's not that black and white. There's a lot of gray when you're talking about trauma and the complexities. And what works for me doesn't necessarily work for someone else. And so when you begin to kind of look at what is happening across the country, it's not just between the man and the woman, or the boy and the girl and the girl, whatever the relationship dynamics are. It's not just between those 2 people or 3 people. It has a larger societal impact. And if you paint that picture, then people start going, well, wait a second, let me pay attention to this. And most people still look at domestic violence as, oh, that's just those 2 people. That's just a toxic relationship. It doesn't affect me. I'm not to get involved in that. But when you start looking at the rest of the pieces, it really does affect more than just those 2 people. And then it really fucks up our kids. And then that's where I really get pissed off about that component of it. And then that's when that cycle continues over and over and over again, because that's the only thing that they know. That's what they were raised in. That's what they saw. And so now those kids have a 50% chance likely that our females are going to be victims themselves, and then our males are going to be offenders, or vice versa. So it's like 50% chance. Those are not good odds.
No. And for people listening, they're like, I don't understand, you know, if you get hit, like, why would you stay? And you know, I think officers for the most part understand this, and you definitely get this, but these guys, the suspects, they are master manipulators. It doesn't just happen overnight. It's not, here's a beautiful relationship and then he smacks the shit out of somebody. It doesn't happen like that. It happens slow and subtly, and then it builds. And
the conditioning was happening years before violence ever even entered into that relationship.
Yes.
So all those power dynamics have been occurring for years before violence actually enters in.
Yes. And so if you're listening to this and you're not, you know, maybe you come from a small department, maybe you don't get a lot of exposure to this type of things, because that happens. And maybe you're not in law enforcement at all, and you're just trying to understand from a civilian perspective. Like, I don't understand how anybody could stay. Like, look, it's not something that just happens. You went on a date to a fancy restaurant, and then, you know, it's been perfect up until then, and then you get home and he just slaps you across the face. Obviously, I think most people in those types of relationships are going to get out of those.
Right.
It doesn't happen like that. The manipulation and conditioning, as you put it, starts happening long before the violence ever occurs, and it just escalates, and it gets worse and it gets worse, and eventually you either get people like Michelle involved, you get me involved, or it gets real bad, and there's no redemption. So that's what I want to bring light to today. So on top of this, Michelle, we do the packets. We're trying to improve the police side of things. You created this organization, or that maybe I should ask you that. Is One Safe Place your creation?
So it's interesting. So we're actually also the crime prevention agency. And before the development of the Family Justice Center, we were called Safe City Commission, which is still our legal entity name. So that we were like a very small crime prevention organization. So like Tarrant County Crime Stoppers, Friends for Life, Campus Crime Stoppers, all in the schools. I operate all of those programs on our crime prevention side as well. What I was helpful with the team of folks of creating is the Family Justice Center. And that is now the physical space. We fought it for years. Like I would say, I work for Safe City Commission. I'm the director of One Safe Place, and people just kept referring to us as One Safe Place. We like the name anyhow. Safe City Commission implies maybe that we're tied to a government entity or we like the city. And so we just started operating as One Safe Place. So the Family Justice Center, yes, I led the planning and development process of the Family Justice Center, which is the partnership of agencies that focuses on domestic violence. But I also, in my position, have all the programs that our entire organization as a crime prevention entity does. I oversee all of them, have a great group of folks. When I hired on at the nonprofit and left the police department side, I was the 5th full-time employee. So teeny, teeny, tiny. Today, there's 20 full-time employees, and I have about 23 part-time employees on site with us as now. So in a 10-year span, we just celebrated our 10-year history of the 10-year anniversary of Family Justice Center. We have experienced quite a bit of growth in that time frame.
That's awesome. So this is all nonprofit.
Yep, all nonprofit.
And how do you guys go about getting the funding for that? That's a lot of employees. That's huge.
And I've got a grant out that if we get both of those funding requests, I'll hire 4 more full-time employees. So keep your fingers crossed.
Nice.
Funding looks at a couple different ways. The purchase of the building was all private capital dollars. We still have $1.2 million. So if any of you out there, are just begging to give away $1 million, we would love to take it and pay off the debt of our building. So that's all private dollars, a lot of $1 million contributions, a lot of wonderful foundations in the Metroplex that have supported the facility. The reason why the private sector has come forward and supported that is because all the agencies that are located at the Family Justice Center, so right now I've got 25, none of them pay rent to be here. So that's pretty impressive, especially if you're a nonprofit organization, because most of them are paying lease space somewhere else. And now, instead of paying for that lease overhead, they're able to not pay that money and then put that into programming. So being part of the partnership allows them to enhance programming efforts, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And so funding is a couple different models, capital side, all private dollars, and then general operating dollars. We receive money from the county. We receive money from CCPD, from the city of Fort Worth, for program dollars. We also receive money from probably about 20 other municipalities in Tarrant County provide funding for the Family Justice Center. I've got multiple federal and state grants that provide funding. And then we also do traditional fundraising events and individual donors, just like any other nonprofit organization would do as well. But probably about 65% of our budget is city, county grant contributions.
Really? Okay. That's amazing. So, all right. I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around to the type of support y'all are getting. Especially when you start talking about the numbers. The thing that intrigues me the most is the amount of officers that are killed that you were mentioning. 66% are domestic violence suspects and whatnot. No one's ever pointed that number out to me before. And I think about it as a cop, and I'm like, well, duh. Like, yeah, but I never correlated the two, I guess.
Wouldn't that have been helpful when you were responding to DV calls to know that information?
Yeah, it definitely would. I also think, so you're talking about the calculator. And me, I remember going through it and be like, Jesus, this person's going to answer yes to all of this stuff. I remember going through that. But maybe just the perspective of that calculator, knowing that it exists and what those numbers signify, maybe that will help me just do a little bit better as an officer. I'm not going to say that I'm going to go, above and beyond on every single domestic violence call. And I'm not saying, that sounds so bad to say. Like, people need to, if they don't do the job, they don't get it necessarily, because there are some people that just, that's just what they're doing. They're just bringing the cops out there to tell on their significant other, and that's as far as it ever goes. And that's the hard part for the officers, because we deal with that so often.
Right, is wading through what is really a criminal offense here and what is just a dispute that's literally wasting my time.
Yes, because
right. I get it.
There's people that do that as well. So if you're hearing me, I'm not trying to sound what's the word? Not compassionate about it. It's it's one of those things you know it when you see it. You know it when you see it on the ones that are wasting your time. It's those ones that ride the line. That's the hard one. That's the hard one. So, and those happen a lot. They all happen a lot, unfortunately. And that's why an organization like yours needs to be probably 3 times as large as what it is, maybe even more.
Yeah.
Because as well as I do, the numbers of domestic violence. I mean, anybody listening to this, if I were to show you, like, for example, the city I work in, if you were to look at a call screen during the day, let's say 6 a.m. to 5 p.m., you're probably going to see on just one side of town 20 domestic violence calls. And that's just one side of town. And that's probably a low number. I'm lowballing that. And that is a lot. So you multiply that, in a week. How many domestic violence calls did you handle in a city with a population of 1 million? And you've got an organization with 24 people they're going to try to help all these people. I don't think that's even near enough.
Right.
And I'm sure you would argue the same. You're getting 4 bodies, hopefully soon. So, how many bodies?
Hopefully.
I was gonna say, how many could you honestly take? Do you think you could use?
Oh, a lot. I mean, and here's the other thing, right? Like, anyone else that's not seated in the city of Fort Worth is a little bit at a disadvantage, because that's where our main hub is. Yeah. And so, I mean, most ideally, I would have multiple centers across the county. We partnered with Grace and Grapevine, and they are so gracious. And basically, if you're out in the northeastern area of the county and you need resources, people are going to go to Grace. And so they gave us an office, but I would love to have someone there full time, but it's difficult to staff that full time because of how busy the front of the house is in the Fort Worth office. So most ideally, I would have multiple locations over the county to easy accessibility. City of Fort Worth capitalizes quite well because of our physical presence in Fort Worth. But some of the other municipalities were kind of sometimes out of sight, out of mind. The general public doesn't know because they're in the corridors of their city. And then people get tired of having to go to Fort Worth for everything. And some just don't have the capability to get to us. I mean, honestly, we have a lot more work to do. There's no question about it. And until we have 0 domestic violence homicides in our county, we still have a lot of work to do. I truly believe that they are 100% preventable because we know what the high risk factors are. And so we just need to be doing a better job of talking about it, making sure that all of our professionals, everyone that's in the system, knows better. But unfortunately, that's just not the case. And there's a lot of work to do, especially as large as our county is.
One of the things I was wondering about, as far as what y'all do, let's say it's a victim with kids, and we'll go with the stereotypical, the female mother with kids. What can you tell me that y'all do for somebody that has children and there's a serious, the husband's the breadwinner, they don't work, the wife doesn't work, they've got the kids. What does one safe place, offer to people in that position in case I know it's going to be a rare, but in case anybody is a victim of domestic violence, but they're afraid to report because they don't have a place to go.
So I think the first thing is when they walk in, they're going to talk to an advocate. If they do have kids with them at that moment, we have a licensed child care center on site run by Clayton Youth Services. And we're going to enroll the kids in the daycare center. First thing out of the gate before we even ask any other questions, as long as mama and kids are okay with that. I'm going to take care of the kids first, going to get them in a room, have a conversation. We're going to do that intimate partner violence danger assessment. Difference is we actually have the scoring component. We're going to tell them what their score is. We're going to tell them what the range is. Survivors years later have told us, like, I will never forget what you told me my score was. That really becomes a defining moment of change for them. They may not make it right then at that moment, but they hear it, now they're processing it, and then they use that in their decision-making skills, because a lot of times they're obviously minimizing the abuse because they're in survival mode and they live in it, unfortunately. They will do some safety planning. Safety planning is very complicated because there's 7 different stages of safety planning. So it's where that individual is at that moment. And then we do what we call, professionally, we call it a service plan. So based off of the needs that that individual has. So for that person that you mentioned, maybe shelter, maybe job, childcare. We're just going to build an individual plan. Prioritizing safety would be number 1. So that's why that danger assessment is so pivotal for us, because like if this is low risk, then I may not be telling this person to go get a protective order and use resources that we know that they're going to get denied for. So that danger assessment really changes and shifts exactly everything that we're going to do and what we're going to prioritize from a safety standpoint. And then that's when we work with our partners, with the 25 agencies that are here. If there has been a recent incident where they have not reported to law enforcement and they got visible injuries, sitting here staring at me right here in front of the screen, if they want to report that, then we may walk them through that criminal justice system. If they don't want to, they don't have to. When they come see us, they can still get help whether they've engaged in the criminal justice system or not. And we wanted to make sure that that was clear when we built our Family Justice Center. And then we just kind of work with them on what that plan is. Only to give you a kind of an idea, only about 15% of the population that come see us want emergency shelter. So the larger percentage of the population that are coming to see us are not going into an emergency shelter. And if you think about it, like, that makes sense. Like, your friends, your spouses, like, if my husband hit me, do you think I'm going to go into a shelter? No, I'm going to make his bitch ass pay for my hotel room, or
Right.
I'm going to go to my dad's house, or, I'm going to go, I have other resources. Most people will tap into other resources. The last place they want to go is to an emergency shelter. So if you're a patrol officer or someone that's responding to this, or a professional in the field, and you're like, you need to leave, you need to go to a shelter. Have you been to a shelter? Like legit, like,
Yeah.
Have you been there? Have you seen it? It is a communal living type situation. It's not like you're in this little penthouse of a place. There are rules, there are curfews. And like, for some people, yes, you have to do that because that's what you need to keep your family safe. But for a lot of people, they will try everything else before they go there. So that's also just a little pet peeve of mine. And you can tell, like, when some of my baby advocates have made the mistake and they tell someone, you need to, like, we're recommending you go into shelter. I'm like, did you see that the bitch just literally drove up in a Mercedes Benz? Like, do you seriously think she's going to go to a shelter?
Right.
And it's just kind of knowing your audience and really building an appropriate plan for that person. And so that's kind of what we do. And then we case manage and follow them, which is really dependent on what the client is ready for. I mean, we have people that walk in all the time and just like their mom or their friend brought them in here, like they didn't make the conscious choice to like walk into the center, right? And so we may just do the domestic violence education component, some safety planning, and then we may not build a plan for them because that person isn't ready to take any action steps. But now they know a little bit more about their situation, and then once they're ready, We can talk about what their options are and what we can help them with. And that's the hardest part about this, is every single situation is completely different.
Yeah, I've taken maybe in my career, I'll say maybe 6 at the most people to a shelter. To shelter.
Yeah.
And they were in dire straits. Like, I mean, they didn't even, she didn't even have clothes because he, a couple of these, he took all the clothes and burned them or threw them away or did something stupid. And it was traumatic for me. It just seeing that and seeing the fear and the lack of trust in where I was going to take them, and that the shelters were going to be able to keep them safe. And so I think it's important for people to understand, like, if you do get in such dire straits, that that is available. And like you said, only 15% of people even take advantage of that or need it. Because they're in a Mercedes or something like that. They've got family. We're talking about people that don't have the family available. They don't.
They're completely isolated, moved out of state, and they've got no one.
Right, and it is a typical power move by.
Yep, absolutely.
By the shithead, but there's
you know the stuff.
Yeah, yeah. There's a show. I've talked to a couple of people on my podcast about it. There's a show on Netflix, I think,
called Made.
Yes, you know about it.
Yeah, you want to know how I heard about it? Let me tell you how I heard about it. I heard about it because I was working with this client who actually her abuser was a fireman, and she had a baby, miscarried the baby, whole bunch of serious things going on. And CPS was in her life because while she got COVID, was miscarrying with the child, she was hospitalized. And so she let her daughter, that was not theirs together, let her stay with actually it was her firefighter's family, which was a weird deal. But she trusted her. 8-year-old went over there so she wouldn't have to upset her school. Structure would still be in place while she was hospitalized, as long as the family of firemen agreed not to allow him around the child, and they said yes. So she comes into the office after she's miscarried the baby. She's living in hotel rooms, has an amazing job, great benefits, graduated from TCU, and now is just trying to find housing and is having a difficult time. And her CPS worker has told her, have you watched the Netflix show The Maid? I really think that you would learn a lot from that. And then begins to misquote statistics to her.
Jesus.
That I've already said on this show, and it really pissed me off. So I was like, I'm sorry. So you're a domestic violence victim, and it's like, you need to watch Maid and maybe you'll learn something. So that's also, by the way, not very trauma informed. We do, as an advocate, we do believe that they know what the fear is. They know what their reality is, which is different for each of them.
Yeah.
And so they don't need to watch a show to be able to learn what a victim is. She is independently in her own right, and her situation may or may not be similar to the show. So that was the first time that I heard there was a show, and I was quite annoyed because I was like, what in the hell?
Yeah.
And why is a CPS worker telling her that maybe this show would be good for her?
I'm not I don't consider myself a PTS sufferer by any means. But yeah. I watched that show, and I was watching it with my wife. She was trying to, it's a chick movie, a chick show. That's the way I looked at it. And she's like, watch this with me. And I'm like, okay, you give in to a lot of the shows I watch. I'll watch this one. So I'm watching it, and I'm trying to understand. I'm like, okay, domestic violence victim, survivor type thing. And I'm like, all right, she's got a kid. And then the episode where she's going through, she's remembering going to the victim's assistance, to the shelter, and I had a breakdown. I started crying. Like I was like,
Aw.
yeah. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? And it reminded me so much of somebody that I'd helped out. And I was like, oh my God. Like my wife's like, are you okay? Like, I was like, whoever wrote this fucking show has gone through this because it was so, I mean, like I said, all the details that they were nailing. And I was like, whoever wrote this is a victim. I'm sold on that. Whoever went through this is a victim because they are hitting details and stuff, or they referred to somebody. I don't know, but I just like, I had a full on like post-traumatic stress issue of a call that I haven't even thought of. I have not thought of since.
You were triggered.
Yeah.
We call that a trigger.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it hit me and I was like, Jesus, I hope she's okay. Like I'm thinking of this girl that I have zero contact with. I couldn't find her if I tried. But
and that's the part that I think as law enforcement that sucks for you all, is that you don't see that, right? Like you respond. I mean, my husband has told me story after story that he responded to. I think one of the most traumatic cases that he ever responded to in domestic violence was he had gone on scene and this guy had like literally like broken both her arms. And then week or so later he's like, that's the same damn house. And he goes back out of the house and he describes it as like, she's got like both arms are casted up where like there's rods, right? And so like literally she's walking around like this and he beat her to just like all in her face, like already fucked up her arms.
Yeah, she can't defend herself.
She can't defend herself, and now he's just gone after her face, and like he remembers just like, are you kidding me? You know, it's like it just puts a bad taste in your mouth, and it's like we literally took this douchebag to jail, we took her to the hospital, broke both her arms, and now we're back out here like less than a week later. Like, are you kidding me? And so like I just remember like him talking about how it's just like unimaginable, and I get it, and that's why sometimes you get jaded. And then what you don't see that I have had the advantage of seeing on the victim advocacy side is you don't see the long-term impact. But I will tell you what I hear from survivors is you will know the difference when they have had a good interaction and a positive interaction with law enforcement and when they've had a shitty one. And sometimes, yes, your hands are tied per the statute. There are things you can and can't do. And sometimes their expectations are really, really high. And that's just not the way that the criminal justice system works. But it's more of like, I've always felt my job, even as an advocate, and I feel like this way for law enforcement. It's like, part of it's just education and informing people. They have been told by this abuser, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. And so our jobs as professionals is to go, this is what I can do, and this is what I can't do, and this is why I can do this and why I can't do that. And just really giving them that information so then they can make informed decisions. And that's what gives them that power back that they've lost. And so I think that's the most frustrating part, is that y'all don't see the positive impact that you actually have, but I do. And they come in and they tell us, like, this person, like, I know that they could have done more. Or a police officer, a person of authority, telling someone, I am concerned for your safety and the safety of your kids, and if you don't do something, they're going to kill you. I mean, that's sort of when those words are spoken from law enforcement or from fire personnel or emergency room and nurses, when those professionals tell someone that's what we hear. What really made an impact on me was this one person said this, and they didn't know me from Adam, didn't judge me, didn't blame me, but they were really concerned for me and my kids. And that's what made the difference for me to walk into a place like One Safe Place.
Really?
That's magic. Yeah, that's magic.
That's good to know. Yeah, that's and I've had those conversations. Like, you listen, you want the truth, or you want me to just tell you everything's gonna be okay?
That's right.
It is not gonna be okay. He's gonna fuck you up.
Yep.
And you may not make it out. So yeah, it's a hard conversation to have. It's hard to especially as somebody that you've got no investment in it as a cop. And this is, and what you're saying is true, is a lot of times we don't get to see the results of anything. We take a report, we help out as much as we can while we're there. We get you over to a shelter, or we take all your information in a packet and we send it on. And guess what? I don't hear nothing about it until the next call at that house. There's no follow through. So maybe that's a conversation that we can have. Maybe that's something that we, as the law enforcement side and your side, maybe telling your employees, you know, if there's ever a positive, you know, maybe just reach out and let that reporting officer know, like, hey, look, because of you, this is what we were able to do.
Yep.
Because that's a motivator. I love hearing feedback. You know, who doesn't like to hear that what you did helped somebody? That's why I'm in this fucking job, because I like to help people.
Well, and that's funny because, like, when I would teach at the academy, we would do, if you've ever heard of this, it's hysterical. You need to do the psychogeometrics personality test.
Okay.
It's 5 shapes. It's a squiggle, a circle, a box, a rectangle, and a triangle. And just without overthinking it, you number it from 1 to 5. 1 being the one you like the most, to 5 being the one that you hate the least, like you hate it.
Okay.
And you just number it. And then it has all sorts of personality traits. And I used to do that in the police academy. And then, like, I would kind of embarrass people because, you know, if I'm going to have to stand up in front of a recruit class, then, like, they should be embarrassed. So I would then make them all stand up, and then they would, predominantly the majority of them would pick the one shape, which is, like, to help people, to serve, like, and, you know, the fun of putting some bad guys away, right? But, like, it was genuinely to help people. And then that was, like, the one shape that none of them ever wanted to be. And I was like, but you are.
Right.
And a lot of first responders and those that are in the helping profession have similar personality types.
Yeah.
And with that, it's nice to know the impact that you're making. And unfortunately, in law enforcement, you know, other first responders, you just don't know the long-term impact that you're actually having. And I teach a victimology class through Tarleton State University through their criminal justice department. And so I still do that shape class there. We talk in language in my office about what shapes are, because we know who drives who crazy. Basically, most people drive me crazy, so because of my shape. And so we openly talk about our shapes. And on one of my sections in my class that we cover is victims and the police. Ooh, that's it's actually like chapter 3 in the book. I literally moved that shit to the end of the semester. I was like, no, we're not going to talk about victims and the police until we've covered all the other basics.
Yeah.
And so to really talk about that subject matter, I have 2 of my Voices committee. So it's a group of survivors that have all experienced domestic violence. And I just recorded a Zoom call with them. It's about an hour and a half. And I play that. And they both talk about their experiences with law enforcement, and some positive and some negative. One actually has positive and a negative experience from 2 separate agencies here in the Metroplex. And I think it's just a learning opportunity. And then the officers that are in my class, you can tell, like, they get real jazzed up about it. Because they're like, they shouldn't have said that. They shouldn't have done that. But, like, yay for the ones that, you know, did the other. It's the same with advocates too. I remember when I worked in the police department getting so mad at my advocates because inevitably after a weekend, all these emergency protective orders are issued. And then guess what happens? The victims start calling and go, I want to drop this. And I remember, like, walking around the corner one day and one of my advocates is like, yeah, you can't drop that. Have a good day. And just, like, hung up. And I was like, oh my God, like, what are you doing? Like, we know power and control. We know the cycle of violence. Like, we should expect them to want to drop charges. Hell, he might be right there with a gun to her head going, call them and tell you want to drop that bullshit.
Right.
Like, we don't know. Like, but we should expect that is going to happen. So why are we getting so mad about it? You know, like, and it's like, well, I'm just tired of dealing with this crap. And, like, they can't drop that. And I'm like, but technically they can.
Yeah.
Unrealistically, are they going to be able to? No. But, like, instead of getting so mad about it and getting our emotions in the way, our job is to, number one, go, why do you want to drop that?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's usually a very practical reason. And I remember one time after my staff had legitimately pissed this woman off because of that exact scenario. And when I asked the question why, and she said, well, I'll tell you why. Because I got my 3 kids, I got his 2 kids, I work nights, and I need someone to watch these damn kids so I don't lose my job at the postal office. So I need him, I need this emergency protective order drop so he can come here and watch his kids and my kids. And I was like, makes very practical sense. So opposed to telling her, no, you can't do this, I was like, well, here's what we're going to have to do for you to drop that. And so instead of asking her to drop the whole thing, I was like, well, let's track down who the magistrate is that issued the order. So now we found out who that is. Now you're going to have to go before that magistrate and ask them. Don't ask them to drop it because they're going to tell you no. Ask them to modify it. Ask them to take off the residency restriction so he can come back into the home and watch the kids and he can't have firearms, he can't commit acts of other family violence against you, keep all those other things in there, and just ask to move the residency restriction because of the practical reason as to why she wanted to drop that emergency protective order. That's providing good advocacy. I don't know if she was able to ever get that dropped. I imagine probably not, because the emergency protective order probably expired before she could even get before that magistrate. So I would assume that she probably just violated the order and hoped that law enforcement didn't find out about it.
Okay. So out of all the things that y'all offer, you know, you go down the, can you tell me just off the top of your head, like the stuff that's offered to a victim, like once they get signed up with y'all and they're trying to better themselves?
Well, how about I tell you the number 1 and number 2 requested need when someone comes to see us? How's that?
That'll work.
Number 1 requested need is civil legal services. People want to truly leave, but there's a divorce, there's child custody, there's child support for financial purposes, and then you add a whole component of immigration issues. And so the number 1 requested need, and this is just not unique to us, it's across the country when people are dealing with domestic violence, is civil legal needs. And let me just tell you, there's not enough attorneys to go around. We have a lot of civil legal partners. They do amazing work, but because that's the number 1 need, there's only X amount of cases that they can take. And a lot of that's also income based. So you have a lot of our clients that make just enough to not qualify for other things. And they don't have money to hire a private attorney to pay $5,000 to $10,000 on a retaining fee. And look, these are not the kind of cases that you go into court and an attorney's like, oh yeah, we can get 2 people into mediation. They're going to agree. They're going to co-parent. They're going to work this shit out.
Right.
It's not what happens in these relationships. So they cost a lot of money. They take a lot of time. And so they're costly. So civil legal needs is the first and foremost. And then the second most highest need that we have is counseling services. And so we have a lot of different agencies on site that provide clinical counseling services for adults and for kids. And so those are the top 2 priorities that we have.
So I had a guest on, Jera Hutchins. I don't know if you're familiar with her at all. She's got kind of an interesting niche. She trains domestic violence survivors on using and getting their concealed carry permit.
Yeah.
Teaching, like, empowering them, I guess you could say. I don't know another way to put it, but it was interesting to me. It was it's a concept that I had never considered. And she reminded me to think of the movie with Jennifer Lopez, Enough. And I was like, oh, okay, I get where you're going with that now. Like, she learned how to kick ass, and that gave her that, ability to mentally conquer her fears. And I was like, all right. So she said that's kind of the premise that she took behind teaching survivors the ability to carry concealed and be proficient with a firearm and all that stuff. And I was like, that is pretty smart. But what's your perspective on that as a person who deals with this on the regular?
So, I mean, my position on that is I've had a lot of offers for retired cops, off-duty cops, to come and do CHLs and self-defense classes. And I have always 100% said no. I personally, for me, if a survivor walks in and they want that information, then I will provide that information and be like, hey, here are the people that I know are reputable. You should go do that. But never would that be something that I would build into a plan. Number one, there's a sort of capacity that, well, if you could better defend yourself, then you wouldn't have been in this situation to begin with. So there's some victim blaming that potentially could be a perspective there. And then the other thing is it could also be a false sense of protection that now they didn't have a firearm, now they brought a firearm in, and the abuser gets their hand on that firearm and it puts them at greater risk. So there's both sides to it, right? Like, I'm not personally opposed to them doing CHL or self-defense classes if that's what they want to do, and I will certainly make connection points to them, but I would never have that as a service provider on site at the Family Justice Center for those other reasons that I mentioned. Like, look, like we're like the crime prevention organization. So, it's kind of like the opposite side of the fence. We don't do clay shoots, even though, like, I know some of our partners do. I'm not opposed to them. It's just when you're the crime prevention nonprofit organization in the county, you probably should steer away from some of those things. I got asked one time to also do there was like a boxing tournament or something like that. And so, like, they wanted to, like, basically they do a third-party fundraiser for boxing. And I was like,
yeah, probably didn't send the best message.
It's just, and look, I know people that do it, but it's like, we just have to be careful about our imaging. It looks hypocritical. Like, you're the crime prevention agency, but here you're, logos all over this like boxing ring out here. So it is something that we've asked for, that people have asked me to do. And I'm like, no, like, we need to keep that away. I just don't want to give the impression to those that if now you have your CHL, I mean, that just means that if they could take it away from you, or you have self-defense classes and they can still beat you up. There's a great example of a case that I worked years ago. And one of probably the hardest safety plans I had ever done. When she came in, we did the danger assessment. She was in high risk. All the red flags for homicide to occur were there. But she had a friend of hers that husband was police officer. And the police officer knew that there was a gun in the house. And the police officer kept telling her, as a friend, get the gun out of the house. Get the gun out of the house. Well, when I talked to her, she is at risk for homicide. So we already know she's with a firearm in the home. She's 500% more likely to be killed. But the plan was she was going to stay in the relationship for 2 more weeks until her daughter went to church camp. And so now something's different. Like, she's going to stay in that relationship. She didn't want the daughter to have to go through all this, so she was just going to wait. And I'm like, okay. So then she says, but my friend's husband, who's a police officer, says I need to get the gun out of the house and I need to get the gun out of the house. What do I need to do? Do I need to move the gun? And I said, okay, well, let me ask you a question. Because now I'm like, well, this sucks. I got a police officer telling you one thing who's a person of authority, and now I'm probably fixing to buck the system. So I said, okay, well, let's start with this. Where is the gun located? Well, it's my gun. I go, okay. And she kept saying, like, over and over and over again, it's my gun. It's my gun. It's like, she wanted me to know, like, it was her gun. I was like, I hear you. It's your gun. Where is it located? It's located on the nightstand, like in the bedroom. And she was like, yes. And I was like on your side, his side? No, like, it's my gun, but it's on his side of the nightstand. I said, so, like, when you walk into the room, the gun is there in the open. Yes. I said, okay. So if you move the gun, will he notice? Yes. And we just said that you were going to stay there for 2 more weeks until your daughter left, right? Yes. Then you can't touch the gun. And then I said, and then let me ask you another question. I said, can he kill you without using a gun? And, like, all of a sudden, like, you could just see, right? Like, this light bulb moment for her. And she literally grabs her phone And she pulls up this photograph of the most steroided dude on the planet, literally going like this, where you can like see my guns. And she was like, oh my God, look at this. And this is like her boyfriend. And I was like, so the answer to that is yes. He can literally kill you without using the gun. And she said yes. And I was like, look, like, I understand why the police officer would tell you to remove the gun, because like it does increase your odds. The problem is you've just told me you want to stay there for 2 more weeks. And so what we got to do is protect the plan. Once you move that gun, he knows your plan is to leave him, and that escalates the violence. I want to try to minimize that. And then I had to have another conversation about, let's talk about your intimacy schedule. How frequently do you have sex? And she was like, oh my God, like every night. And I was like, well, guess what you'll be doing for the next 2 weeks? You'll be doing it every night, because once you stop, if that's your norm, then he knows something has significantly changed, and you don't want to give him any insights that you've decided that you're now going to leave this relationship. And so she did. And then she waited 2 weeks and then she left. And I was like, but by God, when you leave, take the damn gun. And she was like, okay, on it.
Oh, Jesus. God. And that just gives you more insight of the shit that some of these victims have to go through. I mean, imagine having sex with somebody that you can't, you hate. I mean, whatever this victim.
Right. I mean, but you think about it, right? Like she's like, okay, I'm done. I found my independence. In 2 weeks, I'm going to leave. But then she goes home that night, and they have sex every night. And now all of a sudden she's like, I'm not doing that. Well, that's a problem.
That's crazy.
There's a significant change. And then you even have to go like, okay, where does he think you're at right now? And then what was really creepy with her situation is when we found out after she did actually leave and she went to her friend's house, whose husband was a police officer. Literally, she was sitting on the couch one night having a conversation with them. And like she said, like randomly, like her light, like her like flashlight on her phone would like just pop on. She was like, what the fuck is that? And so they did some searching, and he had downloaded a spy app on her phone, on her daughter's phone. He could like get through the camera and could see at wherever the camera was, he could see exactly where she was. So she thought she was, safe. He knew exactly where she was, and then could hear everything that was happening. It was like the creepiest damn thing ever.
Oh my God. Yeah, I've seen it. That's why I knew what you were going to right there was spy app stuff. Yeah. That's a wake-up call big time for people. That's dangerous stuff. That's some insecurity issues big time. Okay. What am I missing? What message? What do you want to get out here? Is there anything I'm failing to ask you that you're like, you know what, I need to get this out there?
No, I mean, my big thing is the strangulation component. I think that's just really huge. Our survivors don't understand it. They think they've been choked out. They think they're good. Like, I'm breathing now. I'm good. I don't need anything. Did they just pee on themselves? Did they just shit themselves? Like, if they did, that person was literally seconds from being killed.
Yeah.
And there's so many long-term medical complications that now we're seeing associated with strangulation and traumatic brain injury. I literally have a speech therapist on site that does diagnosis for traumatic brain injury, and almost all of the patients that we have that are diagnosed with TBI have a history of strangulation over and over and over again.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, just like the football players, just like, UFC fighters, we're having a lot of long-term medical complications, and there really is no reason as to why this survivor has been choked out 10 times and is perfectly fine, and this survivor over here isn't. So we don't have any explanations for that, but to say like they're okay, they're not. And then what we also know is if their arteries have been encapsulated, what will happen is from the time that happens, it could be all the way up, research tells us, until 6 months, that then they stroke out. And so on their death certificate, it doesn't say 6 months ago I was strangled. It just says that you're a 35-year-old woman and you just died of a stroke. It's not usually normal.
Right.
And so we're not connecting the dots of what those long-term medical complications are.
Okay. All right, let me give you another question here. If I were to say, make me the perfect one safe place, the perfect agency for domestic violence victims, what's the future look like? What are you looking to try to accomplish?
Well, one, we need more therapists and counseling for children who've been impacted. I would expand our camping program and our pathway programs. We just last week we spent a week at camp, really talking about Hope Heroes. It's not a domestic violence camp. It's just talking about, hey, bad shit happens and kids don't have any control over that, but they do have control over what their choices are. And really just showing them like people that they know are connected with, that have had hard challenges happen to them, that many of them connect with, and how they've been able to overcome those things and then do magical things. And so that's kind of what we talk about. And we have a theme every year. We do hook activities and a lot of high adventure activities, really fun. So we're looking to expand that and send more kids to camp and doing our monthly pathway activities. And then the other thing that I'm really, really hopeful, something I'm really fired up about, once again, strangulation, obviously. But strangulation is a felony in the state of Texas and many other states, but it sometimes can be very difficult to prosecute. And so in order to prosecute things, we need evidence. So across the country, if you are sexually assaulted, what happens? You go get a sexual assault exam, right? Like the lay person knows that's what you do. You go to the county hospital, you get a SANE exam. Officers, they know it. It's protocol, it's practice, authorize it, boom, done. When that happens, the victim is not charged for that. They have a forensic nurse. They do a whole collection of evidence. They're not charged for that. They're not billed. That it all is handled through the state on the back end. In the event that I'm choked out and I am not sexually assaulted by my husband, I don't get to see a forensic nurse to collect any potential evidence that I may or may not have. And sometimes collecting the evidence of that is a little bit different. It's not as outward appearing as what I used to think that you would see. Sometimes there's petechial hemorrhage in the scalp that might hide, bruising behind the ears, hemorrhaging in the eyes. I could have a swollen tongue. So if officer or EMS personnel doesn't ask me to stick out my tongue, it's like, does your tongue normally that fat? No, it's not. You didn't know before you responded, is my voice that like, it just sounds like I smoked a carton of cigarettes, you know? Does your voice normally sound like that? You don't know what my voice sounded like before you responded. So there's all these different things in terms of collection of evidence. It's not currently being done. So the other grant that we wrote is that I would open up a clinic where I would hire my own forensic nurse and I would do forensic exams for non-fatal strangulation victims. And so what I'm hoping to do there is, one, anything that is said to a medical provider from a victim is admissible. It's not hearsay. Everything is admissible. All the evidence is collected, is admissible at that point in time. And so now I am adding one more person in the storyline, if you will, that can testify in court. I'm collecting evidence that now maybe I can actually hold that offender, which, remember, is the offender that's killing our cops and doing mass murders potentially, that I'm holding them more accountable in our community and getting higher time for them instead of pleading it out to a misdemeanor or something like that. Because there is a high probability that when that case actually does go to court, that the victim won't necessarily want to cooperate at that point in time. And so in order for us to hold our offenders accountable, we need more evidence. And so that is one of the things I'm trying to do. And then the last thing that I'm trying to do is to create a statewide network in Texas. We've kind of been stalled. A lot of that has to do with our history, which is kind of a long drawn out story that I won't go into, but how family justice centers were created in Texas. But we are getting some momentum. We have the first family justice center in Texas is in Bexar County, which is in San Antonio, Texas. It's led by a district attorney's office. We were the second, led by a nonprofit crime prevention entity, which we're like a hybrid across the country in and of itself, the fact that it's a crime prevention agency. The third is in phase 1 development, which is in Ellis County, so our neighboring county. called the Heights, doing great work out there as they are developing in their operations. And then the fourth that is in planning phases, they have not opened, is in Denton County. And their traditional domestic violence shelter-based organization is planning the development of their family justice center. If all four of us are now operating centers, I think what will happen is we will have a domino effect across the state of Texas. And ultimately, I truly fundamentally believe that family justice centers work. It's hard work because when you put cops and potentially prosecutors and attorneys and childcare workers and therapists, and you put all these people together that come from, I mean, already, you know, from their professions are on opposite sides of the fence, but you put them all together, you work together, you build relationships together, you're all fighting the same message. And so it's harder work for sure, but it is completely worth it. We did a community assessment and identified 30 different places in Tarrant County that a victim had to go to before they could get out of an abusive relationship. Like, who in the hell is going to do that?
Yeah.
It's not realistic. And so the idea is that all these agencies were doing great work. They were just doing it siloed. And so you bring these agencies together, you increase resources in your community. When you do that, you make it easier and safer for victims to access the services to go to one place. And so that's what I truly fundamentally hope will happen across the state of Texas. And then we need to do some policy changes. There's no doubt about it that we have a lot of legislative work to do. I fundamentally believe that when a strangulation happens, that the monkey should not be on patrol's back. It should not be on law enforcement to collect all that evidence. There needs to be a medical provider. EMS should respond. EMS should be the one that is asking all the questions about breeding. They should be doing the medical examination. Collectively, if you have law enforcement and EMS saying you need to go to the hospital because you could stroke out and we need to get a CTA scan done for you, and the only place we can do that is at the hospital, if we could have that sort of response, that's what I think needs to happen. The city of Burleson, the city of Kennedale, both implemented through their police agencies city ordinances and policies that when officers are responding to strangulation by city ordinance, they had to call EMS. In the city of Burleson, after their year of doing that, their strangulation assaults went up 100%. Did that mean that there was more strangulation happening in that city? No. That meant that now officers were trained, they knew what they were doing, they were held accountable, and they were like, we're going to call EMS, and then they're going to take it from here. And then that, once again, once you have that EMS responder, the problem that you have, I think that should be statewide legislation. We've tried to do that. The problem that you have is I'm not really sure in some of the rural areas, like, what does that do at a burden to EMS responders? You know, is it already under-resourced at that point in time? So logistically, that may cause more harm in some of our rural Texas areas than in others. But when all possible, we need to be having EMS respond on scene for our victims.
Yeah. No, that's good stuff. I
got plans, man. I got plans.
Got me jazzed up. What can I do to help? No, I like that. Especially the networking. You know, if you can get some sort of a standardization across the board, it always helps. And like you said, you know, if you can make it stupid simple for a victim, they're more likely to get the help they need. It's intimidating. All of it's intimidating. Doesn't matter how easy you make it, it's intimidating. But if they know I've only got to go to one place, and they're going to be able to help me get everything I need at this one spot, why wouldn't I?
Yep.
Why wouldn't I? So I like that. I like that. What advice would you have, or what would you like to see improved with the law enforcement side?
I just think that law enforcement sometimes just needs more information. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. I mean, I didn't know what I didn't know as an advocate 22 years ago. And so I literally, I think in February, right when we had the ice storm, I went down to Port Aransas, Texas, and had a bunch of municipalities of rural counties and cities and no one's ever heard of before. At least I hadn't, and I've lived in Texas my whole life. And normally it would cost around anywhere from $650 to $1,000 to get me for an 8-hour training, and I did it 100% free. And the reason I did it is because understanding in rural communities, they don't have access to the national sort of trainers like that. And they can't change their practices and policies unless they know how to do it. And so I just said, put me up in a hotel, which was, a jank hotel, but I didn't care. Put me in a hotel and I'll come down there and I'll do the free training. And so that's hard to do. So we need the change agents, we need administrators and police agencies to have the information and then actually do something about it and change the system. So that's what I would want. I am the practical person that doesn't think that law enforcement should be all things. Leave the social work to the social workers, leave the counselors to the counseling, leave the medical component to the medical people. I just think try to leave, which is hard, right? Because we're all human. When you're responding to domestic violence, try to leave the emotions out of it.
It's hard to do sometimes.
It is hard to do, and it's hard for advocates, same for us as well. But really, they just need what you can do, what you can't do, what the law says, that doesn't have any emotion to it. And then when you do run across that person that is high risk, just having a professional interaction with them that has a little bit of compassion, that just like, I'm concerned for you. That right there goes so far. And just know, like, you're a person of authority and you're intimidating to them, and they're afraid that you're going to take them to jail, because many of them have been to jail, because it's hard to sometimes find out who's a primary aggressor at that point. They didn't call you, they don't want you there, because they also know that when you leave, it could get worse, or you take them to jail right then, but they're going to get out in 2 days' time, and then what? Yeah. So it's not personal, it's just the reality of the fear that person is in, and there is only so much that that you can do in parts of the system that none of us control. So I don't know, I think that's mine is that, and this is really more from an administrative standpoint, you can do something about family violence. You can partner with community agencies like us and others, and build programming around that. And when you are responding, and even if it's that toxic relationship that you think, I can't do anything with this, 100% of the time, if you think it's a domestic disturbance, tell them, hey, you need to go get help for this. Tell them to go to One Safe Place. I had an officer one time, literally, we had the grandma, the victim, the suspect, and all the kids all ran to One Safe Place to see who could get there first. And we were like, and they're like all there at the same time. And we're like, it's not very often that we have the victim and the suspect on site at the same damn time.
Right.
And literally a domestic had just happened. There was not a whole lot that the officer could do, but you know what the officer did? Y'all go to One Safe Place. And they all did at the same damn time. And the abuser was fine being on site until he decided to go to the car and pull the 14-year-old out of the car and say that he was taking the 14-year-old with him. That then got him criminally trespassed off the property. So most of the time it's not a problem. But I do think that some of those things, like, we don't know what they're not telling you or what you can't see. And so just because that one incident, there wasn't something that happened, we don't know what they may not be telling you and what you can't see at that time. So if you think that this is a domestic and they need help, tell them to come see us, and we'll wade through all of that and we'll find out, because we'll do that danger assessment and we will score it, and we'll know exactly what their risk factors are. And I'm going to tell you, I would far rather see someone when there's only emotional and verbal abuse going on before that physical violence has entered. But unfortunately, about 60% of the time, the clients that are coming to see us are scoring in extreme danger. So the ones that usually come see us, the shit's real bad.
Damn. Mm-hmm. Good to know. Good to know. Well, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head that I should be asking you. I think you've nailed everything that I wanted to cover and more. Definitely very informative to me. Is there anything else that you want to get out there?
No, I just appreciate you focusing on this topic. I know it's a little different than probably the norm, but I appreciate it, and especially for all of the law enforcement partners. My dad's in law enforcement. My husband's retired law enforcement. So, and just working around cops for 12 years. And of course, I have a lot of cops that are in our building. Still communicate with a lot of them. Some of you are getting crucified across the country, and that just shouldn't happen. You've got a hard job to do for sure, and just know that there are people that are in your corner, and that do stand by you and beside you as well. And I'm one of them.
I appreciate that. This is one of the hardest bridges to gap, in my opinion, when it comes to relationships between first responders and in the community, is domestic violence. Because a lot of times we're the face of the shitty part of the job, the shitty part of the whole situation. We're taking kids, we're taking, baby daddies, we're the enforcement side, and it sucks. And you can't have that one-on-one personal conversation. So I needed somebody like you on here to try to bridge that gap a little bit better than what we can do. So, well,
anytime I can help anyone, give me a buzz. If anyone goes to our website and reaches out to the contact us, just so you know, that goes straight to me. So I'll get your email, and either I'll respond personally, or if it's a case you want us to reach out on, or for someone that needs help, then I'll probably forward that to one of our advocates to reach out. But if I can do anything at all, we're here for you for sure.
All right. Let me plug your page one more time. Let me put it up here on the screen. If it will load for me, it's being a pain in the butt. There it goes. So it's onesafeplace.org, correct? All spelled out. ONESAFEPLACE.org.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for anybody. You don't have to have a case. If you have never called the cops, you can still reach out to these guys and at least get information at the bare minimum.
That's right.
And they can guide you from there.
And we have no jurisdictional requirements. So I've had people from Dallas County, Johnson County, all the counties, all the states come see us. We'll still help them. We may not be able to help them in the criminal justice system or civil legal because of residency requirements, but from an advocacy perspective, we'll still help them, connect them to the right places. It can be domestic violence, intimate partner violence, familial violence, doesn't matter, doesn't have to have a time frame attached to it. I say that because we do have a couple of other agencies that have specific criteria, and if it's been within a certain amount of time frame and you're one day past that, they're not going to help you. We really wanted to try to remove a lot of those barriers in our county because there's not a lot of family justice centers in Texas. So if anyone needs help, they can come see us. If anyone has questions, just holler at us through the website. I'll be more than happy to help them.
Well, very cool. Well, I appreciate your time, ma'am.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for having me.
Not a problem.